Hi. Over the past 50 years, more than 60% of emerging infectious diseases have come from animals. HIV, Ebola, avian flu, COVID-19, not isolated events, but signals. Signals of one thing: human, animal, and environmental health are deeply connected. And today, the balance is under pressure. Climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, urbanization, or intensive food systems. And all of this is accelerating risk. And in the background, another threat is growing: the anti-microbial resistance, a slow crisis that could undo decades of progress. Recent outbreaks make it clear: H5N1 spreading to mammals, mpox and Ebola re-emerging, and the lasting impact of COVID-19. One conclusion: pandemic preparedness must stay a global priority. For years, we work in silos: human health, animal health, and environment, but pathogen, you know that, they don't think in silos. They cross borders, they cross species. And that's why One Health matters. One Health means working together across disciplines, across sector, because in reality, everything, again, it's connected. And only by acting together can we better prevent, detect, and respond to global health threats. And the good news, because there is a good news, we can say it, it works. It helped contain Ebola in West Africa. Countries like Rwanda have reduced zoonotic disease through national strategies. And today it's recognized worldwide, supported by organizations like the World Health Organization. But if we want One Health to go further, to become a lasting global practice, it has to live not just in policy, but in education too. Because, and you know that, real change needs people, trained professionals. People can think across disciplines, work across sectors, and turn knowledge into action. And that's where programs like the IDOH Masters come in. IDOH for Infectious Disease and One Health. Today we're joined by students and alumni from this program. Nazneen, let me turn to you. You are my first guest. Could you introduce yourself? Tell us about the Masters and why you chose this path.
Thank you so much, Kamil, for having me today here. So I'm Baby Nazneen and I'm from Bangladesh. I studied this master's program during 2021 to 2023 session in cohort 5. So the IDOH master's program is a very unique and dynamic international joint master's program. It's a 2 years long program taught in English, and basically it awards the students with 120 CTS and with a joint accredited diploma. And this program is supported by 38 associated partners and 9 international and local networks as well, and of course the French Health Ministry. And this IDOH consortium is based in 3 European universities, in Université de Tours in France, the Université Autónoma de Barcelona in Spain, and Hanover Medical School in Germany. So these 3 different universities and the changing of the students in different countries in different semesters actually provide the students with diverse perspective of knowing different countries, and also get to have a hands-on experience from experts from different countries in infections, biology, in immunology, and also in translational medicine as well. And interestingly, this semester is this program is very much well defined in terms of what will be taught in different semesters. For example, in the first semester in France, they focus on the foundations of infectious disease and immunology. And the second semester in Spain, they focus on the epidemiology and the risk mitigation strategies. And in the third semester in Hanover, they basically try to focus on translational medicine and modern diagnostics. But the most important thing about this master's program is the fourth semester, which is based on a research project, and it is very much, I think, one of the very interesting aspect of the program is that you can choose, the students can choose their thesis in anywhere around the world. It can be in a research institution, or it can be in a company, or this can be also the students can choose their location where they want to do the thesis, and also there are a lot of offers shared from the coordinators, so they can choose from the list as well. So it's a very interesting coordination of the programs. And if you ask me why did I do this master's program, it's a very it's a very interesting story for me as well, because during the pandemic in 2019, actually, I was working for the SARS-CoV-2 diagnosis in a laboratory in Bangladesh. So during that time, actually, when I experienced the, the whole scenario about the pandemic and how a small virus can shut the whole world down, so that was the motivation why I wanted to further study the infectious disease. And actually, to choose this IDOH program is basically because I checked their multidisciplinary approaches, how they are teaching on not only the basic science, but also the applicatory methods of the infectious disease knowledge into the real life scenario, like how you would be helpful in the pandemic. So I wanted to be someone who would work in the pandemic preparedness team in future. So yeah, and also of course the mobility as well. I liked the mobility of different countries, and yeah, that's why I studied this
Thank you,
program.
Nazneen. Welcome on board.
Thank you so much.
Max, also great that you are joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself? What do you do at this moment, and why you choose to study the IDOH program?
Yes, thank you, Camille. So my name is Max van Wijk. I'm originally from the Netherlands, still living in the Netherlands again after the IDOH program, although I like the traveling. So I'm actually part of the third intake, so different from Nazneen, I was able to start also in Tours, then Barcelona, but the third semester was in Edinburgh, so still in Scotland, the UK, but now that has changed. So now the third semester is in Germany. I'm currently working as a senior consultant at IQVIA. That's a big global healthcare company. And we support pharmaceutical companies, but also different other stakeholders within the healthcare industry with supporting and doing contribution to improving the healthcare systems. And within my line of work, that is very much focused on the Netherlands, as I'm part of the Dutch team. I think as Nazneen already mentioned, IDOH was also a life-changing opportunity for me as well. I did my bachelor's in the Netherlands, and I got some introduction to particularly infectious diseases, but also One Health. And I was very much interested in the interplay between human health, animal health, and the environment. And at the time, like infectious disease, One Health was not really well studied. And there were not many educational programs, and I think IDOH was one of the only programs that I was able to apply to within Europe. So I did submit the application, and I was very happy to get in.
And you're here today.
I'm here today, yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Max, and welcome on board. We actually have a third moderator who is going to monitor the chat from the online audience. Soeyu Nehing is also an IDOH alumni in the same cohort as you, Max, and finished the program in 2021. Soeyu is originally from Myanmar, a researcher at the Utrecht University, and is currently finalizing his PhD research on anti-microbial resistance, our subject, in Indonesia from a One Health perspective. There could be no more fitting context for IDOH students and alumni to contribute than today's focus on antimicrobial resistance. And it's often described as a silent pandemic. Antimicrobial resistance was, and it was associated with the 5 million deaths in 2019 alone. It's terrific. And with a decisive action, it could claim up to 10 million lives annually by 2050. So beyond the human toll, the economic consequences will be profound. So Max, my first question is, how would you describe AMR in simple terms, please?
Yeah, so I think in simple terms, antimicrobial resistance is the inability to treat infections that are caused by pathogens. And I think it's very important to note that when we talk about antimicrobial resistance, it is more than just bacterial infections. We are also talking about infections that are caused by viruses, as we've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also parasites and fungi, so all the microorganisms. And many people are sometimes confused with antimicrobials and antibiotics. And antibiotics are medicines to treat bacterial infections. So if you have a common flu or a common cold, you should never use antibiotics. Which I think is one of the, which I think is a very important message because many people don't know. But when you talk about antimicrobial resistance, it is more than just the inability to treat infection caused by bacteria, but just in general, the inability to treat infections.
Thanks, Max. Nazneen, your current PhD research is still focused on One Health. Could you please explain in more detail what you are researching and why the One Health perspective is of added value for your research?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. True. Actually, the PhD that I'm currently working in is very much in line with the One Health aspect of infectious disease. So I am working on susceptibility of ruminants to H5N1 virus. I'm sorry, maybe it's a bit, too much virological word, but anyways, so it's the 2344B subtype that we probably have seen the news from the United States that there is a new outbreak of this virus into the cattle species, started from August 2024. So basically, actually, this strain has never been capable of infecting, at least in cattle before, and unfortunately, it has got this capacity to infect and multiply into the mammary gland, which is very much unusual for this virus to infect and multiply. So this, as the virus is infecting into the mammary gland, so basically the virus is also releasing through the milk. So consuming that raw milk or the unpasteurized or underpasteurized contaminated milk can easily be a route for new infection into the animals or into human. So it's a very much interesting project, and also from the last year in 2025, there are several incidents that has been reported that some farmers are already being infected with the H5N1 virus, which is going to be very much unfortunate if it gets increased. So there is a possibility that maybe those farmers are infected because they were handling those this infected cattle, or maybe the milk has been splashed into their eyes when they did the milking procedure or something like this. So I think it's very much important to work on this virus right now, because otherwise, who knows? We shall let's get better prepared before the next pandemic. And
there will be a next pandemic.
No, hopefully no. But of course, we need more science to work on this, so that we can, with the One Health strategy, we can actually keep the virus still. We can control the virus when it is into the cattle, not spreading into the human or other animals. So of course, we need to make some more contribution to this project. Yeah.
Thank you, Nazneen. Today's webinar is part of the upcoming One Health Festival taking place next week in Lyon, in France. We can visit if you want. An international initiative with more than 170 events from March to May 2026, and the goal is simple: highlight concrete action led by all those commit to One Health. Today we are joined by two speakers from the IDOH program who truly embody this transmission of knowledge. Serena Restori, currently a master's student, will share a work on antimicrobial resistance in wildlife, a critical and often overlooked issue. And we also hear from Carla Mena, an IDO alumna who will bring a field experience and insight. So let's begin with our first speaker, joining us remotely. Carla Mena is with us today. And Nazneen, can I ask you to introduce Carla in a few words, please?
Yeah. So Carla is basically from Mexico. She is from Mexico, and she studied the IDOH Master's Program from 2018 to 2020 session. And she is currently working as a clinical system designer in ICON, which is based in Mexico. Okay. And I think she is going to present her talk focusing on the foundational aspects and basic science of AMR. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Nazneen. So, Carla, if you hear us, the floor is yours. Let's go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla Mena Benitez, and I'm going to present you the importance of One Health in the AMR context. So, as Max had already explained, antimicrobials can be, in summary, defined as any substance that can be used to treat or to prevent diseases that can have different origins. They can be from the bacteria, from virus, from parasites, or from fungi. And resistance would be the process by which these antimicrobials stop working into this. So, of course, as it has already been said in the introduction, the direct consequence is that every time it's harder to treat the diseases, as you need to apply either stronger antimicrobials or use them for longer periods of time. So, of course, this is not sustainable because eventually we will reach a point, and we have already reached a point, unfortunately, in which diseases are no longer treatable. So, what can this cause? Of course, like the immediate and catastrophic thing would be just death of humans. But we can see, as we will see later on, it will also have an impact both in the animal health and in environmental and in the plant health. So even if resistance is a process that naturally happens across the time, organisms tend to adapt into difficult circumstances. The rates at which we're seeing this resistance are unprecedented, and that's what it makes it such an urgent matter to do, because the rate at which they are acquiring this resistance is faster than the one that we can cope with in order to have like a healthy planet. So one of the main causes that created this problem that we have nowadays is the misuse and the overuse of antimicrobials. And one of the direct consequences that it will have, and it's already having in hospitalary settings, is that it's causing problems, for example, in medical procedures such as transplants, with chemotherapy, with patients that are immunocompromised. And here I have an image that explains it a little bit better. The origin of this resistance doesn't come like from one place. We can see, for example, here, between the animal sector and the human sector, we can have transmission of resistance both from direct contact with the animals and also by products of animal origin that can be, I don't know, milk, eggs, meat, etc. From the plant sector into the human sector, we can only have transmission. We can also have transmission via the food products, by fruits, by vegetables, by any herbs that we're consuming, also by direct contact, and also by contaminated water. Between the plant and the animal sectors, we can have transmission via the fertilizers, via the soil, and via the water. And between just the human sector, we can have transmission via direct contact in hospitalary settings, that is more common, hospitalary and clinical settings, by travel and immigration, and also by commerce. Here it also applies the commerce of the different products in the countries. Food is food and food production and food distribution is one of the most important transmission routes in the development and the spread of antimicrobial resistance. And for example, even if in veterinary medicine, antibiotics that are used for growth promotion have been banned, for example, in the EU, they have some years that they have been banned. This is not a rule in the rest of the planet. So of course, these disparities of regulations and these banning on some part, but not banning on some part, still leaves some potential routes of transmission by which we can have like resistance flow occurring. The same thing happens with plants. We have countries that have like very strict regulations on what antibiotics can be applied to plants for prophylaxis to prevent them from being sick, let's call it like that. But this is not uniform. So the problem is just becoming like a huge snowball that every time is becoming more and more and more complicated to use if no right actions are taken. So, for example, another cause that can lead to resistance in human medicine, for example, whenever we have deficient public health systems, normally we tend to have like a smaller amount of doctors than the patients that they need to treat. So of course, this pressure of treating a long line of patients, but in very few time and with not that much good resources can lead to having an inappropriate diagnostic and maybe application of antibiotics that were not really for that disease, but they just apply them because it's the best thing that you got, or you have to find a solution right now. A similar thing can happen in veterinary medicine. For example, when we have a lot of pressure to produce like more livestock in shorter periods, we can understand why it might be tempting just to like apply everyone like medicine, apply all the cows medicine, and we'll figure out what happens next. But this was not a good idea like decades ago, and now we're paying the price. So as I was saying, that food transmission was one of the main problems in antimicrobial resistance. One of the main problems is that the consumption of antibiotics in the animal production system is way higher than in human medicine. And also we tend to have less strict regulations with that. So most of the antibiotics that are applied into the animals will not be completely metabolized, and whenever they excrete or they urinate, these antibiotics that were not metabolized will still be left in the soil or in the water. And so they will reach the plants and the cycle will begin again. The wastewater is also a problem that can affect the antimicrobial resistance transmission because, for example, not all the countries have the correct infrastructure to treat water just applied into removing antimicrobial residues. Because we can have a lot of water treatment plants that can help with, I don't know, with soaps, with heavy metals, with etc., but not directly focused into antimicrobial residues. And also these disparities in infrastructure are still leaving, again, a hole in the transmission by which we can still have resistance present in the environment. And in the case of the water, for me, it would be a little bit more worrisome because this water can eventually reach freshwater sources. So they can contaminate not only the area that was being treated with the antibiotic, I don't know, a farm or a crop, but also, I don't know, the adjacent forest, the prairie, the river. It can even reach the ocean. By the ocean, fish are susceptible, then we can eat the fish, etc. Another problem that for me is very worrisome about the antimicrobial resistance transmission is that the antibiotics can also get stored into the leaves and the fruits of the plants. So we are getting, again, like just more and more and more concentration that is coming to us directly via everything that we're eating. Climate change is also something that has a direct impact in antimicrobial resistant transmission. Because, for example, let's imagine a natural disaster. Let's imagine, I don't know, a flood. Whenever we have a flood, what happens? Of course, we know that we're going to need emergency hospitalary services, and that's okay, that's fine. But of course, that's not going to be like the best setting by which you can do a diagnostic. And this bad diagnostic can lead into having the application of antimicrobials that are maybe not specified for that, but it can also aid in the transmission. Also, with natural disasters such as floods, we will have a higher risk of having vector-borne diseases. I don't know, vectors such as mosquitoes, by some kind of ticks, some kind of bugs. And this can also increase the risk of transmission of infectious diseases. And it can also risk the transmission of resistance patterns. We have also to remember that some of the bacteria, like for example, I don't know, Salmonella, they actually thrive in higher temperatures. So of course, we can see why this climate change will also impact the transmission routes. So this is just a nice summary in order just to present like why this is something that should interest us all. In the end, we are all connected, as they have already said in the introduction. And the direct consequence, of course, will be that this inability to treat infections will lead to higher mortality rates, and this will also have an economic impact into all of the spheres. So, for example, what happens? One of the populations that are more susceptible into having transmission of resistance, as it has already been mentioned in this introduction, are the workers that are directly treating either the animals or the crops. So they are like in the first line of risk of having this contagion. So whenever we have like, I don't know, an outbreak of a disease that is no longer treatable by antibiotics, the first economical consequences would be to these workers, to these families, to these communities. And if the problem doesn't get solved quickly, it will just escalate. It will become regional. It can also become national. So yeah. So that's why it's important to do One Health approaches into solving the transmission. It has already been said that the One Health approach is a way to try to find solutions between the three of the sectors in order to find more effective health solutions that can help not only the human sector, but also all of the three spheres. So we can see that we have been slowly, very gradually, been having a shift of collaboration, especially between the human and the animal sector, but still we have the plant and the environmental sector that has been left a little bit like to the side. And I think that this is a mistake, because of course, if we are leaving the soil and the water outside of this equation, we're not going to find an effective solution, and this will only backlash, eventually. So one of the solutions that has been proposed would be to have surveillance systems that are able to englobe the three of the sectors. These surveillance systems are suggested to be as collaborative and multidisciplinary and integral as possible. They have also been recommended to englobe the most amount of stakeholders that can participate. It has been really encouraged to take into consideration both the public and the private spheres of the economy, and to have everyone participate and everybody discuss and everybody propose solutions, because in that way, we hope that we will find a more effective approach into this matter. What is the problem, for example, that we are facing with a lot of surveillance systems? Most of the surveillance systems just operate at a national scale. And we also have the problem that some countries think that it's a good idea to replicate exactly like surveillance systems as they were working on other countries. But we have to remember that each country's context and interest and needs are different. So that's why we will have disparity. I'm not saying that national systems are a bad idea. I'm just saying that it would be better to work in several levels. Work in several levels, and that way we can have like more effective surveillance systems. Some strategies that have also been proposed in order to help with the antimicrobial resistance would be very directed to the animal and the human sectors, would be to have an appropriate and judicious prescribing of antibiotics. So for example, this can also be seen with us. What happens normally? A doctor gives you a specific antibiotic because you have an illness and you take it. And I don't know, you have like some pills left, and 2 years later, you have like similar symptoms and you say, I can use the pills that were left out. And you take them back. Sorry.
Not a good idea.
You can take back the pills. And so, of course, this is a bad practice, but I know that it's very common that we do it. So that's why that's where the public awareness comes in. Because I think that the more that we can make people aware why these bad practices are a problem and why this resistance is something that will eventually harm us all and can have direct consequences on us all, is the first step in order to try to create solutions for that. There have already been some work that has been done successfully. For example, the GLASS report, that was one of the first collaborative efforts in order to standardize antimicrobial resistance surveillance. It worked at many levels of organization. It worked at regional, national, and via networks. So this was a good step. Similar projects have been arising. They have been having very good impact and very good consequences. So let's hope that it continues like this. Public policies, as I have already mentioned, must be done at several levels. They have to englobe both the private and the public spheres. Even if standardization is also encouraged, I also think that you should also take into account what will be the limitations that each country has and try to apply them the best way that they can. Disposal of antibiotics is also a common strategy that has been proposed. For example, this can be translated just into our personal experience. We have to begin to realize, how do we dispose of antibiotics? For example, here in Mexico, in some pharmacies, we have like small containers in which you can put all your pills, and they are processed in a particular place that only focuses in the disposal of antibiotics. But not all the people use them. Like, I know that it's very common that whenever you don't finish like a medicine and it's expired, you just like throw it into the bin or maybe throw it in the toilet, and that's that. So we also have to have a public awareness as to why these disposal practices are wrong and what we can do also. And another strategy that can help would be the antibiotic stewardship. This would be to have the proper care in order to, for consumption and for application of the antibiotics. This has been proposed to be able to cross across the different stages of the antimicrobial life cycle, starting from the research and the development of the antimicrobials, all through the production stages. When you have the application, how you apply them into the users, and how do you dispose of the antimicrobials that weren't used. So this would be a summary of which measures are recommended the most for each one of the spheres. In the end, they have all to be combined and they have all to be applied, but this is the summary. So For the animal of the human sector, it's recommended that you have an effective dosage and that you have the proper guidelines in order to treat. In the animal health, I thought that a very interesting proposition was not only to include in the animal sector just the food-producing animals, but also the companion animals, as it's a transmission route that sometimes it's overlooked. Because, for example, whenever you have dogs or cats and you're treating them with antimicrobials, it's most likely that you're in direct contact with them. So that's another transmission route that not all the surveillance systems that take into account animal health are considering. With the plant health, there has been a particular focus, especially on the way that the antimicrobials are disposed of. As I have already mentioned, we can have a big transmission potential risk in when we have wastewater and via the soil. So as you can see on this image, this is a summary of all the different parts of the antibiotic cycle in which we can all participate. We have to include not only lawmakers and policymakers and governments, but we have also to include pharmaceutical, hospitalary settings, veterinarians, farmers, all the producers, all the logistic change, everyone that is like in charge of, in the end, bringing us food into the table. Because if they're not aware, and if we have like still gaps, we're not going to reach any efficient solution. So what are the good parts of this? The right actions and the right policies can actually help either in the reversal or at least in the improvement of the resistance patterns. For example, the latest JAPA report showed that if we diminish the consumption, we are also going to diminish the resistance that we find. So solutions can be made. And for example, there are two scenarios of countries that have improved their resistance patterns. For example, Malawi decided to do a lot of work in public awareness. They started giving talks. They started doing spots. They started working a lot with the people in order to make them aware of the problem and the solutions that they could have. And via that, the people are also able to ask the government for solutions and to, like demand them for actual solutions. They were also working in strengthening the infection prevention and their control measures, and this has resulted in lower resistance in Malawi. In Burkina Faso, they strengthened their antimicrobial resistance surveillance systems. They strengthened the network so that they could have more appropriate data, and this was done in order to be able to work for solutions, but having data, like concrete data, into consideration. And they also improved their water and sanitation and hygiene settings in hospitalary environments. And this also helps to reduce the antimicrobial resistance. So as we can see, things can be done. You just have to organize, to demand for the authorities, and to and to keep yourself informed. So if I could have you all take some final thoughts into consideration, would be to understand why antimicrobial resistance is a problem that has to englobe like the three sectors in order to reach for solutions, why we have to have policies that are targeted across all the levels and are across different stakeholders in order to work. I think that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, for your inspiring presentation. Thank you so much. Let's open the conversation. We have a few questions here on stage and maybe online. Nazdin, Max, do you have any question for Carla?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carla, for your presentation. I think it was very clear, like what the issue is of antimicrobial resistance. I think one of the conclusions that we can also draw from Carla's presentation is that antimicrobial resistance is naturally occurring phenomenon. So this already happens, but that the misuse and also the overuse of antimicrobials is accelerating the transmission and also the development of AMRs. I think it was very clear. I think there are many examples of initiatives and policies that do work, but they're pretty much focused on human health and human health and animal health still. And the environmental sectors is quite like missing or underrepresented from these conversations, but also from these policies. And that brings me to my question to Carla. So I was wondering, like, what is your perspective on why the environment is not always represented in these initiatives, and what is needed to drive a change into that and to make it a really One Health, like it is already One Health challenge, but to make it a One Health solution.
I think that the environment is often underrepresented. Personally, I would say that it would be because it's something that it's not so easy to perceive. Like, for example, whenever I have like diseased animals, I can see like, oh yes, we have a problem here because they're diseased and they're dying, and so I'm not getting like, I'm having like an economical loss. In the environment, if it's outside of the crops, I think that it's something that it's harder to like measure, because how can you can't physically see, like, for example, when we have contaminated soil or when we have contaminated water. I was also reading that the problem with including the environmental sector in this was that it's very hard to measure the residues that are left on the soil and to have a standardization of the residues that are left. So you can't, if you can't measure the residues, you can't measure the actual usage that you're having. And so this lack of data in the end is what is causing that we don't have like that clear what is the rate of resistance that can be found like in the ground. This can also repeat in the water. And this causes that because we don't have enough data with that, we can't find effective solutions.
Thank you, Carla. Nazneen, do you have a question for Carla too?
Yes, the presentation was really nice. Thank you so much. I think Carla was mentioning at one point that the metabolism of the antibiotic inside the animal is a very critical point for releasing the leftover antibiotics into the environment. I was just wondering if, Carla, do you think that if we consume the meat from a cattle or the fish from a farm where the antibiotics has been used for the treatment purpose, and of course we never measure the antibiotic inside the fish or cattle body before going to the food chain. So do you think it can affect the human health, or it can impact the food cycle somehow?
Yeah, of course. Not only yes, because like in the end, we're going to have like the storage of the antimicrobials inside the meat, and this doesn't occur only in meat. It can also occur in all of the food sources that we have. We can have this resistance also transmitted via vegetables, via the fruits, via the herbs, via water, via everything that we are applying into our body. So of course we have a risk of transmission there. So yes, that's why we have to have like a permanent presentation into this, because there's no way that we can escape, because we need to eat every day.
Yeah, true.
Sure. Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Nazneen. So you, what's happening in the chat? Maybe any question, any reaction?
Thank you. So I'm behind the scene moderating the chat, and in fact there has been a few reflections on your presentation. Many thanks for setting the scene. So I think people are reflecting a lot in the chat, you know, where the problem in terms of AMR. We know that it's not equal, the burden is not equal. Here in TU, we are taking this dialogue, but in most part of the places, they face different challenges. So the particular question is that the burden of AMR is not equal across the globe. Besides the prudent use of antibiotics, what can we do better to reduce the level of AMR, particularly in low and middle income resource setting? Thank you.
So I think that first the conversation should start like between the people. You have to start with public awareness, because if you don't have people that are interested or they are concerned about a problem, they are not able to ask and to demand their governments for effective solution. So I think that the first thing that has to be done is a correct scientific dissemination, that people are able to demand the governments, and that the governments actually care enough in order for in order for them to draw effective solutions. I know that sadly, one of the main things that will only move governments will be the economical impacts of things. So you have to make them understand why this is crucial, why this will eventually become in losses both in the plant production and in the animal production systems, and eventually that can also reflect into sicker people. Sicker people are also more expensive. So you have to make them understand why having correct policies, why having stricter laws, and why having a stricter law enforcement systems is going to help them in the long run. The consequences are not going to be visible like in 2 days or in 2 months, but eventually it will lead to better health, and better health is also better economical systems for the countries.
Thank you, Carla. So you, another question maybe online for us?
Yes, definitely. I think this can be the last question from the online. And the second question is going back to the role of agriculture. And I think, again, we witnessed, you also mentioned in your presentation that the use of antibiotic in EU, European Union, European region is really good in livestock, particularly in agriculture. But what can we also do better in other part of the world when it comes to the use of antibiotics in livestock?
Great question.
I think that we have to develop more stringent laws, but not only develop these laws because they can look like very nice in paper, and when you present them in forums, they can say like, oh, it's such a wonderful idea and it's so nice. But if you don't have an correct enforcement, then all the laws mean nothing. You have to have like a right justice and law enforcement application in order to make laws work. So yes, I think that that should be something that countries, for example, mine, could be doing better, because we have like a lot of laws that are very nice and very friendly, very sustainable and very environmentally friendly and all of these. But if you don't apply them and if you have corruption, then they don't work. So yeah, go to law enforcement systems.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much for your insight. Thank you, Sohayu, and thank you, Max and Nazanin, for this first part. It's time for the second speaker. What we're starting to see is that it goes beyond hospitals. It's not just a medical issue. Max, this is where the environment really comes in, right?
Yes, that's more than correct.
Yeah. Can you present Serena?
Yeah.
The second speaker for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So Serena is also joining us remotely. She's originally from Italy, and she's currently studying the IDOH program. So she's one of the few lucky ones who got into the program. She is joining us from Barcelona, Spain. So she's in her second semester right now, and she'll be, as you already mentioned, she will be focusing on the role of wildlife in AMR, which I think is another blind spot in this whole conversation we're having today.
Exactly. Okay. Serena, if you can hear us, the floor is yours. Go. Oh, I think you are mute. Right now you are mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having me today as well. I'm really excited to share a topic I care deeply about. And I'd like to start with a simple idea. When we talk about antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, what do we usually picture? We picture hospitals, patients, maybe livestock, but AMR doesn't exist only where we usually look. In fact, what if I told you that we are missing a big part of the picture? One that is less visible, but just as important. So today I'll try to shed some light on it, on this overlooked piece, and show how it fits into the bigger puzzle of antimicrobial resistance. So let's talk about this global threat, because it is. Actually, the WHO declared a major growing global health threat, and this happened back in 2014 when the first comprehensive global surveillance report was published. So it is no new information. And even more concerning is that projections suggest that by 2050, AMR could cause up to 10 million deaths annually, surpassing then cancer. So where does wildlife fit in all of this? This is a very common picture that you can find almost everywhere. And this is how antimicrobial resistance is usually represented. We can see it's a highly interconnected system linking humans, livestock, and the environment, with resistance moving through wastewater, sewage, agricultural runoff, landfills, waste, and contaminated water systems. But this representation is often incomplete because wildlife is often missing or it's simplified. And yet, wildlife represents something that is crucial, and that is movement. So let's take us, because wildlife move freely, and unlike livestock, such as cows or sheep, which are confined by fences or subject to strict regulations before transport, wildlife can cross borders and continents without them, without any restrictions, and it can carry antibiotic-resistant bacteria across vast distances, linking ecosystems that would otherwise remain isolated. Resistant bacteria have been found in mammals, marine species, and birds, and the latter are quite important because of migration. That's why research, as you can see in the graph here, has focused on wild birds mainly, especially on gulls or waterfalls, which are the major reservoirs. When we talk about reservoir, we intend a host or an environment where bacteria and their resistance genes can live, persist, and sometimes multiply over time. But since they share their habitat with many domesticated animals and us, their interaction with water, soil, crops, livestock, that creates opportunities for what is called a spillover. Um, that will establish pathways for resistance beyond wildlife population. For example, let's think about wild boars. They share forest or farmland with cows. They can pick up resistance bacteria from manure or water sources, creating a bridge between wild and domestic animals. Similarly, migratory birds visiting pastures with sheep can transport bacteria from one farm to another hundreds of kilometers away. And even species with close contact to humans, like deers in an unusual park or garden, can harbor resistant microbes that occasionally reach people or pets. And that's mainly why we should care about wildlife. Ignoring it in the AMR surveillance can control and control strategies will leave a critical transmission route unmonitored. It will be an incomplete control, meaning efforts focused solely on humans and livestock are not enough. At the same time, this animal can act as environmental sentinels, providing early warnings and emerging resistance patterns and highlighting what can be an environmental hotspots of concern. This is also proven by the fact that wildlife living close to urban areas tend to show higher AMR levels than those living more in rural areas. So what we have to do is develop a truly integrated One Health approach to combat AMR. But wildlife is not just a passive carrier, it actively participates in the spread of antibiotic resistance. There are several mechanisms involved. The easiest one, direct exposure. Animals will encounter resistant bacteria in contaminated environments, such as water and soil. But these bacteria, the thing that they can do is exchange material with one another, including resistance genes, even across different species, which will accelerate the spread of resistance. Let's just think about the fact that we as humans, we are covered in bacteria. So is the environment, so are the animals. So this exchange is very easy and very likely to happen. Plus, improper disposal, pharmaceutical waste, industrial discharge can expose wildlife to antibiotics, promoting then the development or acquisition of this resistance. But will also redistribute AMR actively in ways probably influenced by proximity to human activity, feeding behaviors. Let's think about scavengers. They are like the gulls, for example, they are particularly at risk. We have migration patterns that can also be linked to climate change. So we will have different species in different locations, or maybe in new location when we haven't had them before. And last, habitat disturbance that will let wildlife to move and change habitat. So after these first slides, I hope I've made you think, wow, I don't know, I didn't know any of this, or maybe you did, but you never thought about wildlife playing such an important role in antimicrobial resistance, because that was exactly my reaction when I first started digging into this topic. And naturally, after learning how crucial wildlife is in spreading AMR, you might expect there to be tons of research on this fascinating and fundamental topic. But I'm very sad to disappoint you, because this is some data I extrapolated a few days ago from PubMed, which is an open, freely accessible database. And here we can see the number of publications in different sectors. I looked for AMR in humans, the blue line, AMR environment in animal, and last in wildlife. So if in humans, in 2025, we had almost 2,500 publications, wildlife didn't reach 50. So the problem is that the focus on wildlife is still very small. And the question is, if One Health is one, why are these numbers so different? Why is there such a difference between the different components of One Health? The thing is that wildlife is a challenge. It is because wildlife is not unimportant, but because it's much harder to study and has been historically, unfortunately, deprioritized. You can easily access wild animals. Sampling often requires capturing, tracking, observing animals in remote areas. It involves permits, fieldwork, and specialized teams. And plus, it often raises ethical concerns. So it is time consuming and expensive. In addition, there's a lack of standardized methods, a lack of common surveillance systems. It is a work in progress. We have some publication about this, but it will take some time. And most of all, we can see major data gaps and biases. That means that we are missing pieces of information. For example, some regions of the world have almost no study on wildlife regarding AMR. Many species are rarely or never sampled. Scientists often study easy to catch or abundant species, while ignoring others. There are more research in Europe than North America, or more studies may focus on a certain bacteria, like Escherichia coli, that is very common, and overlook others. But since I talk more in a general way, now I would like to make this more concrete and make you look at a specific example. First, I would like to introduce you to the escape pathogens. That's a group of bacteria that are particularly relevant in human medicine because they're responsible for a large proportion of hospital infections and are highly effective at escaping the effect of antibiotics. And these include Enterococcus faecium, Staphylococcus aureus, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Acinetobacter baumannii, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and Enterobacter species. Among these, Enterococcus faecium is especially important in the context of resistance, particularly when it comes to vancomycin-resistant ones, also abbreviated as VRE. Enterococci are normally harmless bacteria that live in the gut of humans and animals, so they often interact with us in a commensal way. However, under certain conditions, like a stress or an immunocompromised situation, they can cause serious infections. The most common ones are urinary tract infections, endocarditis, bacteremia, and intra-abdominal infections. Less frequently, we can see pneumonia, septic arthritis, osteomyelitis, and meningitis. And one of the main challenges with VRE is the fact that they often appear as a colonizing bacterium, meaning it can without causing the disease. So this makes it a bit difficult to decide what treatment to use when, if it's necessary or not. But despite this, it has been proven that VRE infections are associated with increased mortality and higher healthcare cost. But how did this resistance become so widespread? Of course, it is all of the misuse of growth promoters in feed, in animal feed. A key factor was the use of avoparcin, an antibiotic similar in structure, molecular structure, to vancomycin, which was widely used in livestock as a growth promoter. This created a strong selective pressure, favoring the emergence of and the spread of vancomycin-resistant enterococci. Because of this, the European Union banned avoparcin in 1997, and later in 2006, it introduced a full ban on antibiotic growth promoters. We can see how Europe was kind of a leader in this decision, since we can see the US just decided more or less 9 years ago to fully ban AGPs. And this is a clear example how antimicrobial use in one sector can influence the whole system. But why am I telling you this? Just to see how this translates over time, we could look at data from the ECDC Atlas of infectious diseases, showing the percentage of vancomycin-resistant enterococcal faecium isolates in Italy. What we can see is quite interesting. There is a steady increase up to the early 2000s, reaching around 24% in 2003. And after that, we observe a progressive decline down to 4.4% in 2013. This decrease may be linked, at least in part, to the regulatory actions such as the ban of avoparcin and the restriction on antibiotics growth promoters, which reduce selective pressure in livestock. However, from 2013 onwards, the trend reverses. We see a sharp increase again, reaching approximately 34-35% in 2024, and the curve doesn't really seem to plateau yet. Wildlife is unlikely the primary cause of this, but it can act as a reservoir or a bridge, as I said before, and it can contribute to the maintenance and the environmental circulation of resistance genes. So coming to the real study, what I focused on was using VRE as an indicator of AMR spread in wildlife. So we isolated 106 strains, and here on the table, you can see all the different species we could find, and just one of them came up to be VANC resistant. At the first glance, this may seem like a small number, but it is still important because it provides evidence that VRE is present in the environment and it's very close to us. However, it's important to be clear about the limitation. This was a small-scale study restricted to wildlife in the province of Parma, the small region I come from in Italy. So it's not very representative or of a larger region or different ecosystems. So we cannot really draw strong conclusion about this prevalence or trends of VRE, and that's why the question is still very open. But let's look at a global view. Here I summarized the most interesting publication I could find about VRE, and you can see how it is spread globally, not evenly. We can see a strong number, a big number of publications in Europe, less in Africa, in Asia, just one publication in Sydney. The first isolate in America was in Toronto in 2014, while in Europe the first one was in 2000. So it's very interesting to see how things evolve. And also in June 2024, a team conducted systemic review on wild birds. They examined 38 studies and they found a prevalence of 11%. While on December 25, 2025, there was another first global systemic review on wild mammals, and here they examined 25 studies and they found a prevalence of 8.4%. So you can see how on a small region like mine, maybe you will find not much isolates reaching 1% too, But when you look at the bigger picture, we can see that percentages get higher. So that is concerning, and that is very important to look into. But before we wrap up, I don't want you to leave with with this sense of anxiety maybe from the topic. I want to leave you with some good news, because there are many. There are reasons to hope in the fight of against AMR, and the scientific community, healthcare professionals, policymakers are increasingly aware of the problem. So we know, we have talked about this, and the word has been spread about AMR. We talk a lot about responsible use of antibiotics, which is becoming kind of the norm. And not just in hospitals, but also in agriculture, as you've seen, veterinary medicine. At the same time, research and innovation are advancing rapidly. After a golden age where we found different antibiotics and then pharmaceutical companies stopped searching for new ones, now the focus is back on research. And there is researching new antibiotics, combination therapies, new molecules that will target molecular mechanisms like efflux pumps or nanotechnology. And also lately, a lot of a light has been put on the microbiome and the microbiota, because they're really important in the immune system modulating compartment. And so we're seeing solutions that will reduce antibiotic reliance. Another example, biotic, organic acids, and natural extracts to improve and maintain animal health, so that it will be less needed to use antibiotics. So in short, AMR still is a major global concern, and it extends beyond human and livestock. Wildlife, it's crucial, and it's important to look into this topic. And the One Health is the way to go. It has to be complete. It has to be 360. And we have to remember that to fight AMR, we must think beyond fences, because nature already does. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. Let's take a few questions. Max, Nazneen, do you have some questions for Serena?
Yeah, as Serena was mentioning, it's really quite interesting that we never think of that the wildlife can also play a big role in this AMR things. It's very interesting. It was very interesting talk. Actually, I am very interested to know that as with the globalization and thanks to the transportation, we can easily now access anywhere in the world. So do you think, Serena, that with this kind of like exploring the wild forest or doing picnic into the nature can also help getting AMR through the wildlife into us, or vice versa? Like, is there any connection reported already, or do you know?
Yes. Globalization is it's a thing, and we've seen it also during COVID. That's how it spread so fast. Of course, it is important when traveling, keeping in mind to protect the environment we're walking into, especially when it's new or it's wild forest or more distant areas. Tourists may inadvertently carry bacteria on clothing, shoes, or equipment and introduce maybe antibiotics, other chemicals into this environment. So even though it's relatively low risk compared to maybe hospitals or farms, it is still something to be aware of and to be to have some attention to.
Max, do you have any question for Serena too?
Yeah, I'm more from like a policy perspective, because after hearing this presentation, I think it's very interesting, and I'm quite convinced that we should survey wildlife to get a better understanding of the situation when it comes to antimicrobial resistance within wildlife. Sorry, but I'm my question for Serena is more, is it feasible to do this at a large scale? Would you recommend like policymakers to implement a surveillance system to look into AMR in wildlife? And if so, why? And if not, then why not?
Yeah, we should definitely implement looking into wildlife, as it is a major component, and it is usually the silent one. Because if we can track domestic animals like the ones in farms, and we can sample them, and as I mentioned before, we can track their movements, and we can do health checks before moving them, and if something is wrong, we stop them at the border. Or wildlife, it's so difficult, and it takes time. It really takes time to find a feasible solution, also cost-wise, because it is expensive. But it is very important and very interesting on a scientific view too.
Maybe Serena, like one follow-up question, because I think it will be impossible to survey like all the wildlife in the world. But what would you, if there's like any like low-hanging fruit or any like top priorities when it comes to certain species, or maybe certain antimicrobial pathogen combinations within certain like areas, or is there like any low-hanging fruit when it comes to wildlife surveillance that you would actually recommend to policymakers?
What I've actually found very interesting during my lessons actually in Barcelona is that maybe it will be easier as a start to start from livestock actually, and protect them maybe. They mentioned the fact of creating selective feeders, or if we found some water points there where domestic animals and wildlife can both drink from, maybe make them isolated with fences that only cows or only sheep can have access to, and we can try to delimit the AMR spread this way. Because on a large scale we cannot control wildlife. It's impossible. Also, if we think about migratory birds, maybe if we think about deers, wild boars, wolves, foxes, we had some project on that already, and there are many publications about them. Migratory birds, you cannot stop them. So maybe let's start from baby steps. Let's do baby steps.
That sounds nice. Yeah.
So what are people saying online? Do you have any question for Serena?
Yes, online there are quite a lot of comments, and the first comments are thanking the speaker. So Carla and Serena, the audience, are thanking you for your presentation, also for the moderators for organizing this. So there are very good vibes online. There's one good question from July. He or she said, "Thank you for your presentation. Given the role of wildlife in the spread of AMR, do populations that interact more with wildlife show a higher frequency of AMR compared to urban populations?" So to reiterate it, if people are more exposed to wildlife, do they have a higher risk of carrying resistant bacteria? Back to you, Serena. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And they're more at risk, for sure. There was a case in Portugal in 2018 that involved red-legged, some type of wild birds. That was a game bird. So that means that people would hunt for them, shoot them, and then bring them home and eat them. And they were a major reservoir for, just in this case, for VREs. So that requires, for example, that had quite an easy solution. So that was cooking the meat properly. So regarding human health, in this case, we can take small, careful decisions that will safeguard us from getting in contact with this resistant bacteria. But as I said before, it is low risk, but it's never zero.
Okay. So you, any question again?
Yeah, just one more question. I think that a lot of people are interested in wildlife. As you said, it's not very well represented. So I think this might be the personal question for you from online. So following up on sampling in wildlife, wildlife is very broad. There are so many animals. if you need to pick one species or one animal in wildlife, what do you think is the most important to monitor for antimicrobial resistance? Thank you, Serena.
That's a very cool question. Probably I'll take the same route as the scientists did, so wild birds. But also, I discovered that small mammals are very, very dirty. So they're covered in bacteria and they get into small places where resistant bacteria hides. So I'm thinking about hedgehogs or small rodents. So maybe one of the two.
Thank you so much, Serena, for your contribution. It's already time to end this webinar. And Max, Nazneen, I hope you can help me to summarize some key points from Serena and Carla. Can you begin, one of you?
Yeah, I think from my aspect, I think from both of their talk, we can say that actually we should never be too much worried about AMR, that we came to know that there are some hopes and we can always prevent it. And of course, as we came to know from the IDOH Master's Program and from thanks to the One Health knowledge, that it says if we neglect the animal and environment health, we can never hope for safe health for human beings. So we never should, for any country around the world, whenever the policymakers or the politicians are trying to make strategies for the country, they should always keep this in mind, that we need to take care of the environment and the animal as well, along with the human being. Yeah, I would say so.
Thank you, Nazneen. And you, Max?
I think, I mean, many things have been, that's very difficult. Many things have been discussed. I think what we learn again, and we'll also reiterate what we've already known, is that AMR is a very complex issue. Yeah. And there are many aspects to it, there are many silos, which also makes it difficult to solve or to mitigate the problem of AMR. We see that there's great progress. More and more countries are having action plans. So there's more awareness. I think also conversations like today are helping to increase the awareness, which is much needed.
And programs like IDOH, of course.
And programs like IDOH, of course, So I think that helps. But there's no solution, and I think that makes it very difficult. We are making it maybe even more complex if we're going to add like the perspective of wildlife, for instance. But it's also necessary. So there's always a fine balance between what is needed and how much it's going to cost, like what are consequences. So I think this is very challenging also for policymakers.
Challenging, that's the right word.
Yeah, so I think the challenge, I think that's maybe the second message
challenge
from
between
today.
The scientific knowledge and the policies.
Thank you so much, Max and Nazneen.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you to our speakers, Serena and Carla. And thank you for all of you for being with us. University or two? Yeah. And let's keep this conversation going, and let's keep the One Health approach alive. Have a wonderful evening or night, we don't know, depending on where you are from joining us. And so see you soon. Bye-bye.